Well, this week for our Ask Rabbi Fox segment, we have the joy of hearing a question. I get to wonder about a question from Mark Dressner, a very involved member of our community, the VP of Ritual Practices. I'm very excited to hear and wonder about this question. Mark, thank you for taking the time to think about it together with me and to offer this question. What's your question this week?
Thank you for having me. I just want to give a little bit more background before I ask the question. A few years ago, I was asked to be the chair of the Experience Israel Committee. And the temple traditionally goes to Israel about every 3 years or so. And we wanted to kind of bring that feeling that people have when they come back and keep that going. I ran the committee for about 1 to 2 years, and it never was quite as successful as I wanted it to be. We had a few events, a lot of them revolved around food, but I kind of failed in the long term. And then last year, there's a big movement in the temple to make sure we all voted for reform with the World Zionist Congress that just took place last week. But other than that, there's not a real big involvement with Israel in our congregation. So my question to you is, what do you imagine as it's a 3-part question. What do you imagine as the role of Israel in congregational life? Would you want to integrate Israel more into congregational life, and how would you do that? And I will repeat the different parts if you, but they build.
Sure, yeah, let's start with the first one. Can you ask that first question one more time?
What do you imagine as the role of Israel in congregational life?
So I think that there are a lot of different ways that Israel enriches our life. And a lot of them come from that moment of experience of traveling to Israel, and one of the most important parts of that experience is actually Israel itself. So I'll give an example. The Birthright program actually was formed because they put out a survey, and we're looking for what were the most meaningful experiences that young people had in their Jewish life. And time again, people said trips to Israel. And so a group of large philanthropists, they got together and said, well, let's do this. If that's the most impactful experience, let's send our young people to Israel. And I think that there's 2 reasons for that. I think the first reason is that it is incredibly powerful to walk down the street in Israel and just soak in the history of the place. I have a vivid memory of walking through the old city and passing by an alleyway that didn't seem like anything until I noticed a plaque that described its 2,000-year history. The moment of going to the wall and seeing this symbol of central Jewishness that has captured our hearts for literally thousands of years. And that history is alive when you walk the streets of Jerusalem and of Israel. And it makes our tradition alive in a way that is majestic in that sense. I think there's another reason for that, the power of that experience. And that is also to go to a place where the other half of world Jewry lives. I've seen numbers in different ways. Sometimes they say there's a little bit more Jews that live in Israel, a little bit more Jews that live in the United States. 5 or 6 million live in the United States, 5 or 6 million live in Israel, and about 1 million outside of that in places around the world. And so to see almost a parallel history of Judaism flourishing in the 20th century and on into the 21st, and how a whole different community of Jews have expressed their Judaism through cultural heritage, through language, through the arts in a totally different way, is not only a breath of fresh air and a brilliant set of innovations, but such a new and wonderful thing that it's inspiring to see that and think about, oh my gosh, how can I think differently about my Judaism because of that? And so I think that those 2 things are also things that are powerful in our experience here in the United States. To learn about the history of our Jewish community and our Jewish people through the different landmarks and different historical pieces of Israel, shows us that we are connected to a history and brings us in connection to something bigger than we are simply by ourselves. And that cultural exchange as well, not just learning or reading Israeli books or finding out about various innovations in Jewish expression in Israeli culture, but meeting, connecting, talking, and building relationships with people who live in Israel. I think is something that nurtures not only people here, but Israelis as well. I once heard a speaker give a whole talk about how it's amazing that Americans are going to Israel through birthright, and that she feels that there's even a similar experience when Israelis have the opportunity to come to the United States and see that expression as well. We have this powerful expression of Judaism and siblings just on a small trip to Israel. So I think that those are some of the many ways that we can find ourselves enriched by the beautiful community that they have in Israel.
I really think that's I really like the idea of kind of a reverse birthright in terms of the emphasis being an Israeli coming here and seeing what they can learn about Reform Judaism to bring back to Israel, not to come to the United States and live, but to learn what they can here and then bring that back to Israel. Well, what do you see other than trips? How do you see integrating different kind of Israeli things into regular temple life, whether it's politics or culture or having a say or somehow meeting people without going there?
Absolutely. So there's a few different ways that can kind of take place. One is through direct communication, direct connections of just building relationships with people in Israel. Some of us have friends and family in Israel, and many of us don't have those connections, and so I would certainly welcome talking about and building some initiatives to build relationships with communities in Israel, to learn and kind of glean from the innovation in Israel. And actually, in your role as VP of ritual practices, we've talked about connecting with some communities around the world. And one of the ones that I hope that you have the opportunity to connect with is a group called Nava Tehillah, which is innovating in Israel. When in Israel they write a poem about a Jewish theme or innovate and offer new melodies to prayers, they often come at it from a very different perspective because it's their vernacular, and so they have a completely different approach to what it means to express in that way, and so we only stand to gain from that. And so learning culturally as well, including reading books and listening to music, things that almost sometimes even unintentionally, but powerfully are infused. I'll give the example that Israeli rappers will often weave together. First of all, they're using Hebrew in the first place, so it has all of this Jewish content just by nature of expressions that we might have in English that are deeply Jewish and just an integral part of the culture there. But there's also cultural idioms and parts of the Jewish educational system and Jewish culture that are deliberately again infused into that culture. So you'll hear a rapper say Elohim, it's a completely different way of looking at it. And I think that for us, we can learn about the way that Judaism weaves into every part of our lives, and see the way that that community has done it. So I would say, to answer in two parts. One is building relationships, and the other is learning and gleaning and celebrating Israeli culture in and among our own.
Well, I look forward to working with you over the next few years on how we do that.
Same. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to wonder about these questions together, to think about these things together. I want to make sure that we got to your third question. Did we address it in the? Did I address it in the?
Well enough.
Did we get
well
it in
enough
the
for now?
Okay. All right. Great. We'll explore it another time. Mark, thank you. Thank you so much for wondering together with me, for thinking and thinking together and wondering together with this question. For anyone who is interested, we want to, the transition team and we want to invite you to bring your questions in, to join us for further questions, more wondering together. It is my joy to share my thoughts or who I am, any part that I might, and it's a real pleasure to get to have these moments with members of the community. So if you are interested, this is an open invitation to be in touch with me or the other members of the transition team. And Mark, again, thank you so much.
He wrote.
He wrote.